Wednesday evening to come here. It's a very pleasant evening, and maybe that's one of the reasons why so many of you are here. But let's find out. There's some interesting information, certainly, to come about. A couple of housekeeping things to deal with, first of all. The fire exits are primarily behind you. That's here and here. I won't bother doing the rest of the flight stuff, but principally here. There is actually another one here as well, but primarily, please use those fire exits. And the assembly area is across the road to the right and then on the left. It's the long stay car park, almost opposite, so that would be great. The toilets are also just off the foyer, if you need those, so you know where they are. And there is usually one person that manages to keep their mobile phone on, and so this would be a good time to switch it to silent, if you wouldn't mind. It's quite a horrible feeling when you realise it's your phone going off right in the middle of the proceedings, so that would be great if you could turn them off. Thank you. The other thing to say to you is that this evening is being recorded, so just please be aware of that. That does mean that not only are we in a house of God, but profanity should be certainly kept where they belong and not here this evening. And at least you know what to put up with as far as that's concerned. Right, we'll move ahead with the introduction of the candidates. And first of all, on my right is Emily Brothers, who is here for Labour. Further down the line, this side is Sarah Morris. I'm sure, Sarah, you'll put your hand up so that people recognise you. Thank you. She is for Reform UK. Then we have Vic Slouthian from the Green Party, who is here. Joe Robertson for Conservatives, on my right. Michael Lilly, Liberal Democrat. And finally, David Grucock, who's independent, who's on the end of the line here. Now, this evening's been brought to you by Wightlink Users Group, and therefore we're primarily concerned with cross-Solent travel. And the way this is going to work this evening is that, first of all, we're going to hear a little bit about the candidates. They're going to introduce themselves. And if they're still speaking after 5 minutes, Mark over here will have a little bell, which he's going to ring. And that is our rather polite way of saying it's time to stop. Okay, so thank you very much, Mark. That'd be great. We'll then move on to a couple of questions primarily about the ferries. And then nearer 8 o'clock, we'll be moving on to questions from the floor. And I would remind you that primarily those need to be about cross-Solent travel, because that's really what we're here to talk about primarily this evening. I understand that some other subjects may come up, but our primary focus is cross-Solent travel. And then, in fact, when you are called upon to speak from the floor, we have two people, that's Richard and his colleague, and they will have the microphones. Please do not begin to speak until the microphone arrives. Please do not give me that old adage, oh, it's all right, people can hear my voice, I can speak loudly. Yes, that's fine for people in front of you, but people behind you need to hear as well. So please wait for the microphone, and then you'll be able to ask your question. So we'll take it from there. So to start with, we'd like the candidates to introduce themselves. And one of the biggest problems we have, bear in mind that this particular election, we have the largest number of candidates ever standing across the UK, 4,521 according to Press Association, so you are in particularly good company this evening. But what we're going to do is ask the candidates in turn to introduce themselves, and one of our issues is very often people will give us their opinion, but we also want to know a bit about what the candidates are like and what their interest is, and I'm being waved at. Thank you.
Can I just introduce you?
You may, if you wish, yes, by all means.
Thank you everybody for coming. Can I just ask you, has anybody got any objection to photographs or a video being taken? No, that's okay. So best side forward, please. Okay, thank you, David.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, so as I was saying, it's easy to find out what people's opinions are about things, but less easy to find out about them. So my advice to the candidates is to please tell us a little about yourselves when you are introducing yourself. And we'll start, if we may, with Emily to my right. Is that okay, Emily?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to speak tonight, representing the Labour Party. The challenges before us are significant. And I think, as David said, something about my background. As a disabled person, for example, I have experience of discrimination and prejudice, which I would bring to the role as a Member of Parliament, because I have quite a bit of lived experience in fighting to bring down barriers that I have faced and other people have faced, both as a disability rights campaigner over the years, but also serving for regulators and other public servants. I grew up in Liverpool with failing sight, and the NHS was there for me, even though it wasn't able to ultimately stop my sight from being lost. I had eye operation after eye operation as a child. And then at the age of 9, my consultant at Alderhay Hospital, Children's Hospital in Liverpool, couldn't do any more, and therefore wanted me to go for specialist help in Moorfields in London. And in those days, in the 70s, it was very difficult because of the economic climate as it is today. And it was through a collection on a picket line that enabled me to go to London for that advice. And 50 years on, I am now a governor, an NH governor with that school, with that NHS trust, leading the development of a new world-class centre for clinical excellence research and education, which will open in 2027. And the point I'm making here is that my experiences very much link to what I have done over the years. Fought for mainstream education, risen to senior levels in employment in the public and voluntary sector. And I will bring that kind of tenacity to the role as your Member of Parliament to fight for your interests, to tackle the broken market in cross-Solent travel. We have a situation where essential services are basically unaffordable and inconvenient for many islanders. It also stifles the business, the wider economy of the island, particularly visitors and tourism. And therefore, Labour would refer to the Competitions and Markets Authority in order to look at how competition could be improved and how public service obligations could be placed on ferry operators and other cross-Solent travel services in order to provide and meet the interests of islanders, but also to stimulate the economy when people come here. But also the connectivity with Island Line and improving bus services so we can get our island moving. And that also is about tackling some of the major challenges we face, both in the medium and long term, like climate change. Linked to that, of course, the increased bad weather, the winter of rain, torrential rain that we've had, which has exacerbated the landslip at Ventnor, and therefore that impacts on the well-being of local people and indeed the local economy. So I will be seeking to influence a Labour government as your MP if I have the privilege of being elected. And I would say that when you're thinking about the local situation, who is best placed to represent the interest of Isle of Wight East? If you believe there's going to be a Conservative government, then Joe is probably best placed to represent and influence. If you believe there's going to be a Labour government, then I am best placed to represent this constituency. And I hope I have the honour of doing that. But be sure that I will strive for this community to thrive. I will take forward the case to Westminster on your behalf, and that's why I ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. That's very helpful. We move on now to Sarah. Sarah Morris for Reform UK. We need to pass this down. Oops, thank you.
Okay, does that sound all right? My name's Sarah Morris. I am the Reform candidate for Isle of Wight East, and I have only decided to stand because there was no one I wanted to vote for. So I couldn't bring myself to vote for the Conservatives, sorry. I can't vote Labour because they don't feel like they're me anymore. They don't even feel like they're a Labour Party anymore. I don't think they know who they are. Green, I would vote Green, but at the moment the technology's just not there, and I've got a diesel car and I've got a gas boiler, and I can't just scrap them. I can't bring myself to do it. I like replacing things and fixing things. I look on YouTube to fix things all the time, and I just can't bring myself to do it. So my only option then was to look for something else, either independent, but Reform. Once you get past the preconceived ideas of what Reform are, they really are truly more of they've got more Conservative values and Labour values than both of those other two parties. They're for the people. They want to lower taxes. They want to give us independence and freedom. They want to look after the country. And so I felt like that was for me. So I was born on the island, grew up here. My two children I've brought up here. So I know about the school system here and all that kind of thing. So I've been through it, my kids have. My daughter's now at Brighton University, so backwards and forwards on the ferry, which is a nightmare. My son was played rugby, so backwards and forwards on the ferry, and it's really difficult to get the coaches backwards and forwards because they just don't want to come, so just matches for him. So I'm sticking to the ferry stuff. When I grew up in Ryde, and I was working in the post office, and the lady that owned it was going to sell it, so I decided to buy it. I ran that for 6 years until it was closed with the network reinvention. So I know all about the Horizon stuff as well because it was mucking around on my computer. I was in there really late at night on a Wednesday, and it just opened my eyes to just how badly things seem to be run. They outsourced our computers to Horizon, to Fujitsu for Horizon, and the NHS seems to be running much the same way. They outsource things all the time. It costs too much money. No one's really got any responsibility anymore, and I think that there are a lot of things where we could go back to the front line and the people that work in the hospitals or in the front line of any of these services, the police, and ask them what they want rather than the civil servants or people higher up in the management to decide for them. So I just think that in every area, if we went back to common sense and asked the people what they really want and how they think it should work, that's what Reform stand for. All of us are ordinary people that just want to have a better country where we're not taxed to the eyeballs, that we can actually have a bit more freedom and independence and be trusted to do what we know is right and not have people making rules for us on every tiny little detail. So I think I've not done the time, but
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, that's great. I wonder if we can move on to Vix now from the Green Party. If you could pass that over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A bit of an introduction then. So my name is Vix Albion. I am a teacher. I'm a parent. I volunteer at a number of different groups ranging from the Carnival to local theatre, historical association. I'm on the committee for the island for that, and I helped out at the COVID vaccine centre during that at the Riverside Centre. I drive a petrol car. I have gas central heating. I don't fly. I haven't flown for about 10 years. I think we can all do what we can do, but we can only do what the government are allowing us to do and are giving support to, and at the moment that's where I'm at. I didn't have Sky Television as a child. In fact, I lived on a council farm and I was on free school meals when I was at primary school. I moved to the island in 2005 and I lived in Bonchurch for a while until I realised I was going to have a baby. And that baby just did his last exam today at the age of 17. So I have 3 boys. The youngest is 13 a week today. I joined the Green Party in 2014 after studying with the Open University when the boys were small. I was doing a science degree. It took me 14 years to do it, thanks to these tricky elections. And I completed that last year. And through doing that, I was studying geology, chemistry, engineering, renewable energy, and realised that was the biggest issue. And I joined the Green Party. And it was about 3 or 4 people in the pub, and they kicked me under the table and said, how about standing in the general election? And we did that, and we went from 900 to 9,500 votes. And since then, I've just stayed with it, because I feel a sense of duty and responsibility to do that. I've been the education spokesperson for the National Party since 2016, so I get to go around the country, talk to people. I've shared a platform with Layla Moran, Angela Rayner, John McDonnell, Jeremy Corbyn, and Suella Braverman. I've now stood in 3 general elections, and I have been on the national executive for the Green Party for the last 3 years, in charge of policy development, coordinating all of that. So that manifesto that they revealed today comes from all of those policies that I helped to coordinate. I love my job as a teacher. Absolutely love it. I teach A-levels in geology, history and classics. But I also would absolutely love to represent Isle of Wight East as a Member of Parliament up in Westminster. My priorities would be clean water, which is a basic, and through that sorting out the privatised system for that into a publicly owned system, if possible. I would like to help with housing on the island, particularly social housing, rental controls, as well as clean, warm and insulated housing where we don't waste energy. I would like to help with public services, particularly our healthcare, education and the court and criminal justice system, which is a huge backlog to cover. Obviously climate and nature, and I would like to put forward the Climate and Nature Bill with a team of Greens that are going to be in Parliament this time. And of course the ferries, and I think you can see that on the leaflets that some of us have been able to put out for you. So I think we're very lucky in this election to have such a wide range of views in front of us, and such a great diversity, and to a certain extent, of candidates from all the different political facets. And having these Hustings events to help us to do that, and it's a really good turnout. So I look forward to hearing from you and any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vix. You can hang on to that one, because next up is Joe, and Joe's got his own mic at that end, so...
Hello. Thank you very much. Thank you, David, and I'm delighted to be here. I really look forward to this Hustings in particular, because it's what I would call a dominant issue Hustings, where I think we all come from a same viewpoint that the ferries are not good enough. There might be differing views in what we do about that, but I think we all share that same position. I will start by saying a bit about myself. So I grew up on the island. I grew up in St Helens, which is where I live now with my wife and 2 young children, one who's just started school and one who is still at preschool. I was originally a family law solicitor, but I left the law and joined a national nursing charity where I work alongside the NHS every day, helping to improve and increase the amount of community nurses working outside hospitals in communities where people want them to be up and down the country, including here on the island. I was first elected as one of the island's youth regional MPs when I was still at school in this very town, and here I am quite a few years later standing to be your next MP, because I want, like you, the island to be an even better place to live, to work, to grow up and to visit. So my priorities and the things I've been talking about the most on the campaign trail, and the things I've been talking most about when I knock on doors, are promoting business and jobs, improving community care and supporting local schools. But of course those 3 things have one common thread, and that is better ferries. Business, job opportunities, opportunities for young people on the island are hugely dependent on the ferry service we have. So too healthcare, and so too schools, because being severed from the mainland, and sometimes literally severed through ferry cancellations, it's hard to, for example, recruit teachers who are able to live on the mainland and commute. So people have to come and live here if they want to work here and know that they can reliably turn up in the morning. So I see ferries as almost the super priority that runs through everything else. It runs through the way we live our lives on the island day to day, whether we're consciously thinking about it or not. So I'm really looking forward to getting into the questions. Delighted to be here. And I look forward to particularly the second half, I think, where we're hopefully going to have quite a lively debate with lots of audience participation. So thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Moving across now to my left, Michael Lilly, please. Michael, you'll need the... Yep, that's it. It's on.
Hello. My name's Michael Lilly. I'm the candidate for the Lib Dems. And I actually remember Steve... I was a schoolboy here. I give away my age, but I was 16 when a great Liberal called Steve Ross actually stood, and I actually put leaflets in 1974 for him before I left the island to actually find work. And I spent most of my life as a mental health professional. I was a clinical and counselling psychologist specialising in post-traumatic stress, and particularly I worked with the Vietnamese boat people, if you remember them, right through to Bosnia and things. So I particularly was based in the West Midlands. I had a very big psychological practice, and particularly worked with people that came from war zones. So I was very much at that time a counsellor, in a sense. I also had a family, and I wonderfully, like a lot of people, have two families, because I had my first family, and my first wife wasn't very well, and I ended up being a single-parent dad for 20 years. All my children, my daughter, they're all in their 40s now, so it's a long time. In fact, I've got two grandchildren. But I then had a second relationship, which is carrying on. My wife's not here tonight because she's just recovering from an operation. Sends her regards. And she worked in child protection. So we both worked really in the public sector for most of my working life. I came back in 2013 to look after a very elderly father who did die in 2015 in Ryde, and carried on in mental health until I retired at the age of 60 in 2017. My wife has only just retired from child protection work. And I went from being a counsellor to a counsellor, and I was elected for Right Hand Council and for the Isle of Wight Council for Ryde, Elmfield and Apley. And I've been there in the council about 8 years, and I was mayor of Ryde right through COVID and afterwards for 4 years. So I'm very passionate about the town of Ryde, but also the whole of the East Wight constituency, which is this is where I'm going to die. This is where I love and be. As a councillor, I've campaigned for 8 years to have an Island Act, because we need a fair deal for islanders, because that piece of water is the most expensive piece of water practically in the world. And it means that actually we have ferry poverty. Let's talk about ferry poverty, because the difference that piece of water makes, that our budgets on the island, whether it's in a health or a council, start nearly at about 30 million deficit before we even start. It is totally unfair. And the poverty on this island, which is the highest in the south coast per capita population, means that we have children that actually can never afford to go across that piece of water. I took a whole lot of children to Winchester Science Centre before COVID, and the coach was full. Half the children, and these were 10-year-olds, have never been over that water. That is one of the realities. And my passion for human rights and social justice, which has been all my life, my father was a founder of Amnesty International, I believe that we have got to do something about it, and it's got to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That's very helpful. And David Grucock now for Independent.
Oh, hello everybody. I'm the last one to speak. I was the first one the other night, and I was quite grateful for that because I've never done anything like this before. At the last election, and probably all the others before that, I was probably in the audience listening to politicians giving false promises like they do every election. Anyway, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I live in Ventnor. I've lived in Ventnor all my life, or nearly all my life. We moved to the island when I was 9. I did my schooling in Ventnor and ended up at Sandown High School, went to Isle of Wight College, learnt my trade as a chef there. I took over the family business in 1989, which is now a guest house in Ventnor. Traded successfully, got through COVID, which was quite worrying at the time because we didn't know how much support we would have, but we did have support, and I'm very grateful for the support we had. Otherwise, I would not be in business today, and I think quite a lot of businesses would say the same. Unfortunately, since COVID, I think businesses have been dealt a rough deal by the government. We've been more or less said with the prices of energy, which we all suffer, well, there you are, get on with it. You'll have to put your prices up. But the customer won't pay if you put your prices up. So we're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place. And business has been very hard for us in our particular industry. We do face things like Airbnb springing up all around the island with second homes, which impacts our business. Nobody seems to do anything about that. I know that the rules have changed a little bit now, but I think it's sadly too late for a lot of businesses. When we first moved into Ventnor, there were probably about 125 to 130 hotel and guest houses in the town. We've got about 9 at the most now. That's very sad. There's a business not far from me, a hotel, where the father died about 4 years ago, and they are struggling because they can't run it, they can't do anything with it, planning won't let them change it, change of use, so they just live in it, running down the business. Now that can't be right, so planning needs to be looked at. In my spare time, I do a lot of gardening. I won White in Bloom last year after the second attempt. I was really proud of that. I was going to go in it this year, but I then entered the election. I thought, I'm not going to have time to do that this year, so the weeds are going to have to grow a little bit. I play the piano. Played the piano for the last 8 years. I learned when I was a child, and I now play for the guests in the evening, and they tell me they enjoy it. I'm not really sure if they do or not. I don't sing as play the piano, incidentally. So that's me. Why I'm sitting here tonight as an independent, we've got issues in Ventnor, which I'm sure you all heard about. The major landslip back in December was a major event. Unfortunately, it closed one of the access points into Ventnor. We now only effectively have 2 routes into Ventnor, and on the 24th of June, one of those is going to be cut off to us. So the poor people in Whitwell, St Lawrence, Godshill, all those surrounding areas are going to have twice as much traffic going through there. I know there's going to be a one-way system. They tell me it's the wrong one-way system, but nobody seems to listen to the residents who live there. So we've got problems. So we formed a pressure group after the first public meeting because we were totally dissatisfied with the answers we were getting from Island Rose mainly. And we formed a pressure group. We now write emails constantly to try and get some action on getting not just Leeson Road open, but all the others as well. we haven't really got very far because we're always told it's a risk, insurance, and if a rock fell on you, you know, the council's liable and all that. But it's people's businesses and mental health inventor that's been affected here, and this has been going on now for 7 or 8 months. At the back of me we've got Gillscliff Road, which is another very important road that's been closed for 5 months because a rock fell on it. We're now waiting for netting to go up to secure the rock face, even though nothing has fallen on that road for 5 months. And it's really irritating. Well, not irritating, it's damn well inconvenient. So that's one of the main reasons I'm sitting here tonight. But I'm not just a one-trick pony. I have a passion for the island. I do believe that the island does get a raw deal. I do think we're sold short with the ferry service. I deal with the ferries every day. We book people's ferries for them. We have an allocation, and I've run out of time. So, more or less, if you want to ask any questions, you can ask them later. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, David. Right, so that gives you a fairly good idea of what we're going to move to now is to ask the candidates to answer 2 particular questions. The first of which is this, and I'll read it out twice. What do you see as the minimum service delivery for cross-Solent travel, and how do you plan to engage with ferry operators to bring this about? It would also be helpful to have some sense of timescale. So what do you see as the minimum service delivery for cross-Solent travel, and how do you plan to engage with ferry operators to bring this about? So perhaps we could start with Sarah from Reform UK. Okay. You'll need the microphone. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I've probably done the same as every one of you, go a mile a minute down to the ferry because we can't miss it, because otherwise we'll be sat there for another 3 hours in the freezing cold waiting for the next one. So I'd say that the car ferries, in my opinion, should probably run at least every hour through the night. Throughout the day, I don't see why they can't run more regularly than an hour. We always used to, and we used to have more people on them. Like we've just heard, the bed and breakfast, they were busier before. There's definitely the traffic there. It's just that it's too expensive for people to use. So I did mention when I used to have a bed and breakfast myself. We'd have people phone up and they'd book, and then they'd phone me back about half an hour later and say, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to cancel. I've just tried to book the ferry and it's too expensive. So that was it, booking gone. So my parents have got a bed and breakfast still in Ryde down the seafront, and they hear the same thing all the time. So the people want to come, it is just too expensive. So I do think that there's definitely, they should be putting, we could put more on in the daytime. I think the business is there, they'd say it wasn't. But throughout the night, I think we need at least 1 hour. I've sat over there, I've missed, say, the 12 o'clock, sat till the 3 in the morning, not necessarily just Wightlink, Red Funnel as well. And you're sat freezing cold in your car. They don't even put Wightlink slightly better. You've got somewhere you can go and sit, but it's not comfy, it's not warm, there's no telly. Red Funnel, you've got nothing. You have to sit in your car if you're lucky to turn up in a car. The passenger service doesn't run late enough for you to be able to go to any kind of event on the mainland. So boxing, theatre, nightclub, anything, birthday party. If you've got to you've got to hit that 11 o'clock coming back or whatever. Otherwise, you've got to sit and wait until 2 o'clock in the morning for the car ferry. It's ridiculous. It's not good enough, in my opinion. I think, so maybe an hour.
Thank you. I probably neglected to say that these answers need to be restricted to 2 minutes so I can get through, but it's my fault entirely.
Okay, so can I just how I do it then? Or not really? Or
we'll give you a discretionary minute. How about that?
Okay,
Thank you.
I promise I won't run over on the next ones then. As a reform government, we would buy 50% of the company. It would be classed as critical infrastructure. It would be purchased, and then we'd have more of a say. If I was in opposition, then I would push for a statutory instrument to make sure that the landing areas were split from the ferry business. It would allow them more competition, other companies to come in and use the landing areas, which they can't at the moment. So we've got monopolies, so that I would force the split, and then you could bring in more competition. And that would be immediate, pretty much, because it would be a statutory instrument. So.
Thank you very much indeed. Could we move on to Michael Lilly, please?
Thank you. I think the important thing is we have a reliable and cost-effective, fair-funded ferry service. We have a ferry service at the moment, particularly the cost of which moves. It's going to go because of the Isle of Wight Festival within that. So it's very difficult for people to actually plan. And I think there's a lot of people here, like me, that actually can only see our children, adult children and grandchildren, and are limited to town because that piece of water is too expensive for us to regularly go over or for them to actually come. And that is totally unacceptable. So we need to actually have a regulator so that all the prices are fair, particularly for islanders, and I think there should be some form of discount for actually living on when we live on the island. For that, we need equality. We shouldn't be at a disadvantage. The average wage, weekly wage on the island is £75 lower than on the mainland, but we have to pay that premium, or that costs, and it fluctuates. So we need to have consistent pricing, and we need a service which is reliable, that's adequately staffed. You know, any business, you've got a restaurant, you don't say, oh, we haven't got a chef tonight, so you can't actually give the meal. But that's actually what happens on the actual ferries within that. So we need to actually have a proper regulated service. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I want to go to Joe next, please. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. So I think it's a two-stage question, wasn't it? What would be your minimum service delivery, and how would you work with the ferry companies to deliver it? I think the most frustrating things with the ferries, it's not just that they're bad, but they've got worse, and they're getting worse. And they're much worse than when I was growing up. So I think the minimum service delivery, I'd probably take a timetable from the 1990s and say, here, you were private companies then, how about that? Because the timetable in the 1990s had half-hourly services running through the day, late-night car ferries ran through the night, catamaran service ran late so you could go to the mainland in the evening and still get back home again. This was all done while the companies were still private. I don't understand why it's got worse. It doesn't need to get worse, and it has. So a good starting point for a minimum service would be their own timetables from about 25 years ago. And in terms of how I'd work with them to get there, I don't think that's deliverable working with the ferry companies. They're not going to do it. They're not going to bring about the change on their own that's needed. And that's why it needs government to step in and regulate. I'm all for working with the ferry companies to get some small changes, but they're not sufficient to bring about the wholesale change we need. So I'm all for good relations with the ferry companies where it can help, but they're simply not going to bring about the scale of change that's needed. So government regulation. For me, I will work with whichever government comes into power on the 4th of July. The Conservatives have put in their manifesto yesterday that they want to see and have pledged to an all-options review into the ferries. I think that's a major step. It's a first to have effectively a local issue in a national manifesto. And that all-options review, I would be fighting for regulation of timetable and prices by the government that the ferry companies must deliver, or else we'll find someone else to deliver that service for us.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. Vix, please, next.
Thank you. I don't want to repeat what I think everybody's going to say, which is cost, frequency and reliability, but I completely would want to look at a minimum. I like how we get asked for a minimum, not a maximum. We're looking at a real basic here. But what I would also like to see from the service is that it is properly regulated in terms of finance. At the moment, we are putting our money to travel across the Solent to a company which is making £17 million of profit a year on us. I would like to see that as a minimum service which is taken away and our service is run not for profit. The rest of it is just my personal opinion, which we all have our opinion on this, don't we? And we're not really moving forward just based on opinion. There are lots of reports I noticed that our previous MP, Mr Seeley, produced a report which identified the problem but didn't really identify exactly what the solution would be. We've got here a lot of reports that Wightlink Users Group have done, looking at accessibility, at education, at medical and healthcare. Reports and data are really useful. And how I would enact it, without being MP, I think the work that Wightlink users are doing, putting public pressure on Wightlink, is incredibly valuable. As MP, I would be with a group of Green MPs who'd be pushing Labour to be a lot bolder than what they've said so far, but also I would want to join the Transport Select Committee. I think any Isle of Wight MP should want to join the Transport Select Committee because it's fundamental to what we are having to deal with here. So I'd want to push the government, I'd want to use the House of Lords. We've had Baroness Jenny Jones here and she suggested we could put forward a bill through that system. But in particular, I would want to join a group of Green MPs to push the next government to be a lot bolder than the words that they've used so far.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think finally that's... sorry, beg your pardon. Emily, you're next.
Thank you. This is, of course, a complex issue, and it is an issue that has been around for some time. I welcome what Joe has said about the need for regulation, but I wonder where the Conservatives have been for the last 14 years whilst services have got worse and worse. It is a useful starting point, perhaps, to look at timetables and fares from 25 years ago, but I think a more fundamental review of the market is needed, and that's why Labour have committed, Sir Keir Starmer has committed to refer the matter to the Competition and Market Authority to recommend a future economy for cross-Solent travel that will have a set of, we would envisage, public service obligations on ferry and other cross-travel Solent travel operators like the Hover Travel, which would be linked to some public funding, so that performance is very much linked to failures and therefore sanctions, or good performance in terms of incentives. We'd have to have, I would be looking as your MP to influence the Labour government to invest in improvements, because it will bring economic benefits to the island and indeed the wider southeast of this country, and therefore there are significant gains for growth and stability, and therefore referring it to the Competition and Market Authority I think is essential, because the system is broken, it isn't working, and we need to fix it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Emily. Right, David Grucock, yeah, thank you.
Right, well, thank you. Yes, my experiences with Wightlink are, well, similar, because, as I said, I have to book people's ferries for them. And I also, when I'm talking to prospective visitors to the island, I always ask them, before I offer a discounted ferry fare, because we have trade rates, well, how much is it that they're asking you? And if it's a bank holiday, it's over £300 for a short break. Now, can that be right? No, it can't be right. So the pricing is catastrophically out. It's shot up in the last 2 or 3 years, and it isn't right at all. So yes, there needs to be more frequencies. I also remember when it was a half-hour service, excellent service, and a late-night service. I think a couple of weeks ago, people went to take that concert in Southampton and were stranded. Well, that's wrong. Wrong on so many levels. We have a right to a full ferry service. So how would I engage if I was elected as an independent? Because I wouldn't have the knowledge or the privilege of the Labour or Conservative. Well, as an independent, I might hold the key, because they may well listen to what I'm telling them, in as much as I might be that very one important person they need to win a vote. And I'll tell you what, I will use every card I have to swing that vote in my favour for the island. Yes, it does need to go to the competition committee. It's already been to a monopolies committee and been overruled that it's not a monopoly. How that is a monopoly defies logic. It is a monopoly. The prices are virtually identical. So we know what's going on. They are making loads of money. They're owned by venture capitalist companies. When they've made so much profit, another venture capitalist company comes in and buys it. So from one year to the next, you never actually know who owns any of the ferry companies. So they're not ours, and they should be. The ferries should run for us, and that's my line.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, that's given you a flavour of the answers that our candidates have put forward, but we have another question for them, again with answers restricted to 2 minutes, please. What political avenues would you pursue in order to bring about structural change in the ownership model of cross-Solent ferries? So, what political avenues would you pursue in order to bring about structural change in the ownership model of cross-Solent ferries? And I'd like to ask Joe to kick off this one, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, political avenues, clearly persuading the government. I think only the government can bring about the change we need. I think sitting on the Transport Select Committee would be very interesting, and there may be some influence that can be exercised there, but fundamentally it needs to be the next government that comes in on the 5th of July who makes that change, and I don't think the House of Lords or any committee is going to, it simply doesn't have the power to make those decisions. I think the Conservative government is the most likely to be listening. Not least of all, it has now put it in a manifesto. But I'll be very clear, if a Labour government wins, I will work with a Labour government. And let's not forget, a lot of the machinery of government is the civil service, which is an independent organ of government. And I will work with them just as I would work with a Conservative government. So in terms of the ownership model of the ferry companies, I think if governments step in and regulate, like they do with the trains, and say, this is the minimum service you've got to run, half hour through the day, all through the night, late night passenger service, and this is the pricing structure you've got to operate, a cap, get rid of this ridiculous budget airline type, I can go on holiday, for a cheaper price if I do it on this day, not that day. This isn't about holiday travel for islanders, this is about essential travel. So get rid of that ridiculous pricing structure where it's more expensive on certain days because of tourism. And I think the ferry operators will be less profitable, and they will have to be more realistic, and you might find you get corporate change at the top because of that, because suddenly the pension funds, or whatever they are, don't find the ferry company such an attractive prospect, and they will be sold off and they will become independent because of the government regulation on them. And that's how you control the ownership structure, through the regulation of the timetable and prices.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much indeed. Vix, could we have your view, please?
I think it's very nice to hear that we are in the Conservative manifesto. I'm very sorry though, but I don't think that Rishi Sunak's going to be the Prime Minister. I'm not even sure that he's going to be the leader of his own political party if you read what's in the newspapers. So really, it's looking at a Labour government that's going to be coming in. And I must say here now that I was quite disappointed with what was released a couple of weeks ago about Keir Starmer being supportive of the Competition and Markets Authority investigation. That's great. But without strict regulation, without looking at the possibility of public ownership and nationalisation, then all we're going to do is go through the same system that we've done before. So what's incredibly important is that we elect, on the island, somebody who's going to be able to push the Labour Party, or if pigs flew, the Conservative Party, push them to be a lot bolder in what they're putting forward. Because otherwise we're just going to be tinkering around the edges and we're still going to be stuck with this privatised model. If I've got a few seconds left, ideally, politically, to be able to look forward for a solution, we'd still be in the European Union, and we'd be able to look at infrastructure projects which they fund across the European Union. Unfortunately, that model is closed to us, so I would, as your MP, be pushing Labour to be a lot bolder than they've been so far.
Thank you, Vix. Appreciate that. Emily, could we possibly hear from you, please?
Yes, thank you. Labour on the Isle of Wight has already been talking to the next Secretary of State for Transport, Louise Haigh, about referring this matter to the Competitions and Markets Authority. We believe that is an important way forward. We will continue to work with the Labour team, whether we be in government or opposition, to raise these issues, to bring about change for the benefit of islanders and indeed our economy. And rooted in that will be the need for public service obligations. And mention was made of the rail success, but I have to say that I haven't witnessed that in terms of regulation. So we will need to see a step change in regulation in terms of fares, performance, delivery of services. I know as a disabled traveller how tough it can be. You can't just necessarily turn up and go like non-disabled people. So when you get a cancellation, it can be very stressful, and it is something that many older islanders and disabled people on this island or visiting it find very challenging. So I will want to work, yes, with Labour ministers, but I will also want to work with users of services, people here who experience day to day, week to week, the difficulties in crossing the Solent on ferries and other forms of transport like the hovercraft, in order to improve it. I want to know what you feel, what your experiences are, and how we can change that with a regulatory framework that will work for you and not work for Wightlink and their investors, who just take more money and drive up debt, which is at the cost of you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Appreciate that. Moving on now to Michael Lilly, please.
Thank you. The private equity model is needs to go, simply as that. And the way that I've looked at it is how that we actually look at an Island Equality Act, which actually recently the Isle of Wight Council passed a motion actually agreeing with that. So as the MP, I would work with the Isle of Wight Council in actually looking at actually getting the legislation that is actually needed to not only regulate but to look at the ownership. And one of the things we would need is that the Isle of Wight would have either share ownership of it, or it would look into some form of public ownership. But it has to change. You cannot have this particular model which is literally taking money off, putting it into other companies. And one of the things I would do is have one of my team, because teams come, that would actually focus on that. So it would be a carrot and stick approach, i.e. very clearly saying to the ferry companies, you're going to lose ownership of this if we go through, but the carrot, we will talk to you. We will start immediate conversation and say, we're going to do this, but actually if you start changing the way you operate, actually listen to local people, then we will have some say. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Could we move on, please, to David Grucott?
Yeah, it's all interesting, isn't it? Because it is all about how it's owned and what these big multinational companies are and what their remit is. Their remit is to make profit and make profit for their shareholders. We know that, so that system has to change somehow. How you do that, I don't know. I mean, I've just been listening to that, to the others, what they're saying. I don't know how you would renationalise private companies like that. That's going to be a very difficult thing to do. But I do think what you can do is regulate them, so there is a price structure that they have to work to. I think that's quite a good idea. I think that's one that I would support. Not only that, I think they should run a timetable that suits the island and not the shareholders. So those are two things that I would certainly push for if I was in Parliament. Beyond that, I think you could run a railway system where you put it out to tender after 4 years, so you've got it for 4 years, and now it's going to put to another company. That's another model that you could look at. Nobody's talked about that before. That might work, so if you put another company in to run it, they may run it better if they put a proposal together so that it can be looked at. So I'm sure there's an answer to all of this. As I say, I'm a user of Wightlink, so I've never really thought about what the model is, only that it's wrong, and we all know that, and it needs to be fixed.
Thank you, David, and you'll not be surprised to realise it's Sarah's chance with the mic now. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. So regulating the amount of trips that they do and the cost, absolutely great, brilliant. My only issue is that regulation, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily always work. So you look at the water companies, they are regulated, but we've still got dirty water going into our seas and our waterways, because when they go against the regulations, all they get is a fine, and then the fine goes directly onto our bills. So it would possibly be the same thing with the ferry companies. You'll put regulations in place, they fall foul of it, they don't meet the regulations, they get a fine, our prices go up. So I think as well as that, you can put it in place, that's fine, but I don't necessarily think long term it's the right idea. Richard Tice has said that it would be part of the critical infrastructure. It is for us, it is a road. We need to make sure that we should have bought it years ago, obviously, before when it did get sold, but we didn't. If you split, it's a statutory instrument. It's easy, it's really easy to do. You don't need an act of parliament. You just go and you go to the Minister of Transport and you get the statutory instrument, and they can put in place the rules to take away the landing areas away from the ferry company business. It's totally separate then. And then that allows, I know some people don't like competition, but competition, if you have 5 restaurants and one of them's rubbish, you're not going to use it. Competition is a good way for them, if that new company is an island-owned business, or we put rules in to say that it's at least got to be a UK-owned business, because they're all owned by foreign companies at the moment. So if we open up the landing areas separately, and then we allow other companies to come in, if then we put some kind of regulation on those, maybe we own those, maybe we let Blue Funnel, or we give some kind of grant from the council. We need extra money as an island. Obviously we can push for that. I'm not quite sure why that hasn't happened. I don't think anyone knows why it hasn't happened. We keep getting promised an island deal and never get it. That money could be used to have our own Isle of Wight ferry company that we own, we've got shares of. Obviously, if we're not making much of a profit, if we don't use our own ferry company, I think that could work.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, you've had a chance to hear from all of our candidates about those 2 questions on the ferry. Questions from the floor, and I wonder if I can ask our AV guys to pick up their mics. Now, there are specific ways of using the microphone. It's not a lollipop, but these 2 will demonstrate how to use it, as they are doing so now. That'd be very helpful. And will you please wait until you have the microphone in front of you before you start speaking? That would be very helpful. We're going to take about 3/4 of an hour for questions from the floor, and then at 8:45 I'll be asking each candidate to sum up for a couple of minutes. And after that, we'll have some closing remarks and invite you to refreshments. And I'm sure someone will make sure the urn is put on, because that's absolutely vital. I've got a thumbs up from the back. That's great. Thank you very much indeed. Good. Right, let's start with questions from the floor, please. Who would like to ask a question? Gentleman with a sports jacket, 2nd row back. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Paul Martin. I'm an ex-engineer, merchant navy engineer, and I've put various suggestions in through the paper to the council. And I think it's time sold that off, and both of those companies have loaded up with so much debt nobody could buy it. You know, it really is.
So your question, if I'm right, is
Yes.
about whether we should open up a new route across the Solent.
We
Is that
should.
it?
And the one I thought of was a new road, a mile road down to King's Quay, but slightly to the right, and that would go directly into Portsmouth Harbour up to the Continental Ferry Port.
Right.
It'd cost a new mile of road. ABP wouldn't own that as Associated British Ports.
Yeah.
And consequently, because every time a lemon boat, the sums of money they charge us.
Right, thank you. I have to say this isn't the opportunity for commentary, this is the opportunity for questions. So your question was about whether we should open up a new route across the Solent. Let's see what our candidates think about that, if we may. Thank you. Thanks very much. Right, let's start with David Grewcock, please. David, you'll need the microphone, I'm afraid.
Totally agree. I think there should be. King's what is it called? Yeah, that's right. I'd heard that. Yeah. Well, I think that is that's one of the areas that you should use. And on the mainland, obviously, there'd have to be a landing area there as well. So yeah, I fully support that. I think it would open up the competition. A separate ferry company, I believe it's being talked about now, isn't it? A new ferry company coming to the island. Didn't I read that in the county press? I think that would be good to open up the competition. You know what would happen, of course, that the other two would try to undercut it. So there'd have to be some sort of agreement so that they wouldn't be undercut, and some help for that new company to get started with. Maybe some funding from the government, something like that. So yeah, I think that would be a good idea. I would support that.
Right, thank you. Moving on to Michael, please.
I think the important thing is to explore all options, and you know, we need to be innovative and actually creative within that. And I think that's something that would need to, you know, be worked with the MPs and the local council to actually explore those. One particular idea I explored, I used to be on the Isle of Wight Pension Board, and I discovered that 10% of the Isle of Wight Pension Board could actually be used and invested on the island. That 10% is nearly 100 million. So actually, we should be looking at how we can use existing monies that could actually be invested in a way to either go into existing, become, you know, shareholders or part owners of the current ferry companies, or actually look at new options or new companies that could actually have ownership of people. So I think the key is we need to think out of the box and actually explore options that get a fair deal for islanders on price.
Lovely.
So that's my view on that.
Thank you, Michael. Could we move on to Emily, please?
Yes, I'm very much in favour of big ideas that can potentially capture regeneration for local people. So I've certainly felt that there's great opportunity, for example, at Sandown Bay, in the way that we've had services in the past. So I'm told by older residents, for example, about the Waverley steamer ship coming into the end of Sandown Pier on a regular basis in the past. There's no reason why that couldn't happen again with another ship or other kind of vessel. The pier is now in private ownership, but there's potential for negotiation. There's also the option of bringing in a hovercraft to perhaps the Wightlink part of Sandown. So I think there are feasibilities that could be undertaken that could not only help with cross-Solent competition, but also would help to regenerate Sandown Bay. And I'm sure there would be other calls from other parts of the island for similar services. But I would say, as someone living in Sandown and knowing Sandown well, that it would really be give a boost to the local economy if that were to happen.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Emily. Moving on now to Sarah, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think putting another ferry company in, it opens up the competition. Islanders would have to make sure they get behind it, like you say, to make sure it didn't go under in the first couple of weeks and they buy it out. But we could make sure that happened. The thing is, I think quite a lot of, obviously independent is a little bit different, but the other parties, they've got no idea on how we're going to raise money to pay for all this stuff. So they can promise you the world, but they're not going to end up coming up with the funds with it. Reform UK have got fully costed plans. We will end up, we pay currently at the moment interest on the money that we were printed through COVID and through the banking crisis. We pay £35 billion every single year in interest on the money that the banks printed back to themselves. That's why they took the caps off the bankers' bonuses and they pay it back to themselves. That's got to stop. There's money there. We can save £5 in every 100 in the waste within the NHS with all the government systems. We've done that at home over where we've got not enough money coming in at the moment. We can do that. It's 50 billion, and there's another 35 billion which we would have by scrapping net zero for the time being. It's making everyone poorer. There's money there with reform to do all of these things. But you ask any of the rest of them where they're going to get the money from when they'll promise you this extra ferry service, and it's not going to happen. So we're realistic. We can actually offer these things. We've got the money and the plans for it. It feels like empty promises again, and it's annoying. Sorry.
Thank you very much indeed. And over to Joe, please.
Yeah, so I think we need to be careful when thinking about big ideas and bold ideas to solve the ferries, that we're not missing more achievable goals. And there are some great big ideas out there, but the chances of achieving them, I think, is extremely challenging. I mean, we're not talking about government money for a new ferry service. I would back a plan, and there is a plan currently on the table, that's viable and that's fairly well down the tracks. And I've spoken to, in fact, I've met with the director of that project on several occasions, and I think our council leader has as well. And that is a light ferry service, car ferry route between Ryde and the Continental Ferry Port. And from what I've seen on the papers, that looks viable. It's someone with significant experience in infrastructure, and I would back that all the way. But that's going to succeed or fail based on the individuals involved and whether they can deliver the funding for it. And I think the thing that's particularly exciting about that is it isn't a private model. It would be a non-for-profit organisation that would run it. But we can't sit around waiting for some very capable and well-meaning individuals to succeed or not succeed, and I hope it does. We need to get on with the regulation that I think is needed for the current private companies. And the question you mentioned about privatising the companies back in the 80s. People have different views on nationalisation or privatisation. I get that. There is no reason why these private companies can't be so much better at running ferry services. And if they were regulated, they would have to be better, and that would be government intervention in the private sphere, and I back that. I think that's fairly obvious.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Vix, please.
Thank you. I understand and I sympathise with people looking at alternatives to the ferry companies that we've got. But I'm going to go against the grain here of what everybody's said. If we keep going for new potential ports, where does this stop? Because the proposal at Binstead, for example, is in an area with a woodland. They would have to rip up the environmental regulations for that to build a concrete piece of infrastructure. When we've actually got the infrastructure, the problem is the access to the infrastructure. So, for instance, in Yarmouth, you have a harbour that occasionally independent private companies try and do a new passenger ferry service, don't they? Because they can, because it's a public harbour. Whereas at Fishbourne and at the Red Funnel ports, they own them. Now, there are potential avenues there. I'm not a big fan of the free ports, but there is potential there for compulsory purchase through the free ports, which our island has been sucked into. So there's potential there. But it's a much wider issue. We keep chasing after private companies to run big infrastructure projects like this. And it's not just the ferries, it's water, it's energy, it's rail. Now, I don't know about Europe, but at the moment, all of those look like they're broken. Competition is not getting us anywhere. So the next government is going to have to show some clarity and leadership on that and not just keep chasing, thinking new private companies can solve all our problems, because it's not worked very well for the last 30 years, and I don't think it's going to work well for the next 30 years. We do need to think outside the box, but not necessarily by building new ports and harbours to suit that.
Thank you very much indeed. Looking at the number of people who put their hands up earlier, I'm afraid I'm going to change the rules for this evening. We are going to have some rather more pithy replies from some of our candidates, and so therefore I'll also ask your audience if you would please keep your questions to what they are indeed questions rather than commentary. And we'll start, if we may, with the gentleman at the back of the room, and I'll come to you later, madam. Thank you. I think you'll find a microphone is on your way.
Thank you very much. My name is Malcolm Watson. I'd like to ask each candidate whether they would support the provision of a road bridge between the island and the mainland, and if not, why not?
Thank you, that's very succinct. The question is, would candidates support a road bridge to the island, and if not, why not? And could I start with Joe, please?
I mean, David, I can be very pithy. No, that might be too pithy, too short. No, I don't support a road bridge. I don't think it has the public backing for a start. All sorts of other reasons why I wouldn't back it. I do concede it would sort the ferry issue out in one tick of a box, but it doesn't have the public support, hugely expensive, and there are all sorts of issues around congestion. I think it would change the nature of our island forever, and I don't back that.
Lovely, thank you. Emily, could we ask you to reply next, please?
Yes, I think the key things to address are around regulation of cross-Solent travel in terms of the ferry and other services. I just don't think where we are in terms of tourists having trashed the economy and all sorts of systemic problems that our country is facing, that it is viable to have a fixed link. That might change in the long term when the next generation are perhaps in a position of seeking different prospects, but I don't see that as a medium-term option, and I think we need to have the focus on improving the current services that we have available for local people and visitors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vix, please.
Thank you. No, I wouldn't support a road bridge because we can't take any more cars on here. I think the only fixed link which I would be supportive of and I have been on the record of supporting a feasibility study would be rail. That would be the only one that I would, because at least that wouldn't be congesting all our roads with more cars, but no, not to a road bridge.
Thank you very much. Moving on, please, to David.
It's all about infrastructure, really, isn't it? Yeah, you could build a bridge, but it's both sides of where that bridge lands and the road that serves those both ends, and it would bring more cars to the island. I've always been quite open-minded about that, to be honest. A tunnel is another way of doing it. My brother is going to the Island Games up in Scottish Isles, and I believe there's now a network of tunnels between some of those isles, so you don't have to fly to them. So they are possible, nothing's impossible, but I just think I think it will happen, but I don't think it'll happen in this generation or maybe the next. It probably will happen at some time. It's inevitable that we will be linked to the mainland, but I don't think it's the time now to do it. So, yeah, I would have to say no at the moment.
Thank you, David. Can we move on to Sarah, please?
Yeah, no. Personally, I like living on an island. I know the ferry can be a bit of a nightmare, but I do actually. Is that me? Oh, yeah, no. Personally, yeah, I do like living on an island. I know the ferry can be a nightmare, but I do like it, and I do think that a road, when they did the feasibility studies, it was going to bring a lot more traffic over. Our roads are congested enough as it is. You have one road closure, that's it, you're stuck for hours. So unfortunately, at the moment, I'd rather try and get the ferry sorted out than a bridge. The only thing that would change my mind is if it worked for the people and everyone on the island decided that they wanted a fixed link, and that's fair enough. But exactly. But as it stands, I think most people, I think most people would be quite happy with, without. So that's as it stands.
Lovely, thank you. And Michael, please.
Last thing we need is a referendum. But, what we need to do is get the ferries regulated, because this is an island, and that's its USP as an island. People come here and visit here and have holidays here because it's an island, and I think it's very important we actually keep that. We just need to make sure that we get the price right, as it were, on the ferries, so that it's fair for islanders, but also does attract more people to actually come. And also we develop our great heritage of engineering on the island. You know, we produce the largest blades for wind farms in the world. We built rockets. We're building the Islander plane is going to be the first zero-emission passenger plane being built at Bristol Norman. So we need to get that cost down, but the answer, unfortunately, is no to a fixed link.
Thank you, Michael. We now have the next question from the audience, and the lady in the front here, if you wouldn't mind, is it might come in just a second. Lovely, thank you. Thanks.
I've been using public transport on the island since the late 40s, early 50s. I have personal experience. What I've listened. What I haven't heard is we have an incredibly ageing infrastructure. The ferries need to be replaced. They've made some mistakes with island railways.
Could I ask you to restrict yourself to a question, please? Thank
Sorry.
you.
So the question is, where is the money going to come from for the replacement of existing stock, let alone new ways?
Right, so you're talking about the replacement of the existing ferries, are you? And where the money will come from. Thank you. Right, perhaps we can kick off with Vix on that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, again, you're absolutely right. In particular, Wightlink have not invested in their ferries. Southern Vectis have been investing in new buses, and has been very excited seeing all the people at the Esplanade taking photographs of the electric bus. But the money, in terms of where the money comes from. So this morning, the Green Party launched their manifesto, looking at where their money would come from. And they would look at taxing wealth and assets the same way that the rest of us get taxed on income. So looking at a 1%, the top 1%, the people that have assets of £10 million, there could be people in this room that I've referred to. People with assets of £10 million would pay a tax of 1%. There is a tax, a carbon tax, for those businesses which are the most polluting. So when you have the current ferry vessels that are very old, 30 years old, they would be encouraged, therefore, to make sure they had ferries which were not polluting. And ending fossil fuel subsidies as well. So again, making sure we look at that. So you would get money from other pots, not money on taxes that most of us would pay, but taxes that people that own assets would do.
Lovely. Sarah, please. Thank you.
Well, that's the problem where they're privately owned at the moment. The CEOs don't want to take any of their extra profits and reinvest them back in the business. But that is the problem with having two private companies working as a monopoly. They don't have to bother reinvesting in anything. As it stands, it wouldn't be the government that would step in and pay for any of these new ferries. But obviously, if it was a community-owned service, if we could split the landing area, so it's not putting a new one in and damaging more of the environment, you would just open up competition to use the existing landing areas and take some of the time, some of the access away from the existing companies and hand it over to another one. That then maybe those ferries would be funded by a government, but that, as it stands, we are relying on the to private companies investing in themselves, which they're probably not going to do because they haven't been.
Thank you. And Michael, please, next.
There needs to be a mix of different forms of investment, and we need to all have an Island Act which actually gives powers on the island to be able to invest our own money, keep a lot of our money to actually invest in. I talked about pension funds before. We need to look at the wider funding. The green pound and green investment is quite considerable now, and we need to have that talk. So very much as an MP, I would bring different forms of investor along with the government and with the local authority, and how we can actually get not only the development of our transport like the ferries, but also look at all the different forms, the Island Line, the buses that actually have had a major investment in, so that we're actually looking at in a much more creative way of actually doing that as an island, which other islands around the world actually do. We can actually learn from places like Tasmania that have actually brought major investment to develop their infrastructures. So I would want to be a catalyst of bringing that different investment together. I'm a founder, trustee and investor in White Community Energy, which is a solar farm, which actually, a lot of its actual money is actually being raised by local people investing. Instead of investing off the island, they invest in the island.
Thank you, Michael. Right. Emily, could we hear from you, please?
Yes, it's very challenging in terms of the investment situation. We see Wightlink, for example, pay just in debts payments in 2022-23 is £16.8 million, which is more than the shareholder profits. That's where regulation comes in, linked to public service obligations. And if elected as your MP, I'll be seeking to influence government for resources that are linked to performance of ferry companies that ensures better delivery of reliable crossings and affordable ferries too. So I will advocate for that. I think there are significant economic benefits that can be derived. There's been a lot of talk over years about an island deal, which I think the sense I have is much more about sort of dealing with Isle of Wight Council's deficit, and that is of course an important issue. But I think we need to be more ambitious and strategic in our approach. So I would want to explore the options for developing an island pact between your Labour members of Parliament and the Labour government to do things differently. There isn't tons of money to chuck at this situation because of the economic tight corner we're in, but we can do different things differently. The Competition and Markets Authority can advise us. We can bring about reform by doing that and take a realistic and pragmatic way forward. But the ferry companies will have to change, and if not, then Labour as a government will step in and make that change happen.
Thank you, Emily. David, please.
I think it's only going to be regulation that makes the ferries reinvest in new ferries. I believe, unless I live in a different universe, that Red Funnel have ordered two new boats. Unfortunately, and Vix would agree with this, they're going to be diesel and not on green energy. Apparently there's not enough electric supply to be electric boats, which is a shame, because there should be. If we're thinking green, then the new boats that come to the island should be green. So I would go along with that. So it would be regulation, and I would urge, if I was elected into Parliament, that the regulation for the ferries across the Solent must be renewed after a certain period of time. They are old. I remember when the Lymington ones were put on, quite a few years now, because I was on the opening day when it first came over, and they were absolutely fantastic, but that must be about 30 years ago. So yeah, regulation is the only way you're going to do that.
Lovely, thank you very much. And finally to Joe, please.
Yes, so new ferries, new fleet, maintaining infrastructure should be paid for by the ferry companies that own those ferries and own the infrastructure. I mean, they do renew ferries from time to time. Wightlink have got their reasonably shiny, certainly big, newish one. But I'm not sure failure to renew the boats is creating unreliability, certainly on the Wightlink route. I think it's, we're told when the ferries are cancelled is because of a shortage of a key staff member. So that's not the ferry's too old problem. It's there's some major staffing structural problem, or it's possible, I have no idea whether this is true, it's possible, it's just a money-saving measure as well. So I don't perceive there being a problem with the ferries too old, and in fact, St Faith, the 1990 boat, is the only one that can run in very high winds because the new ones, too high-sided, the two newer ones are too high-sided and too big and they can't control them properly getting into the harbour. So sometimes the older stuff is more reliable than the newer stuff. And I would be very concerned about public procurement and a public body sourcing and purchasing ferries, because our most recent experience on the island of that situation, of course, is Floating Bridge 6, which has been an absolute disaster. So I think private companies aren't too bad at getting new ferries, it's how they operate them that is the problem.
Thank you very much. Those of you who've spent idle moments on Whitelink's ferries will know that they draw approximately 8 feet. So given the high amount of top hamper that some of the newer ferries have, it's hardly surprising they're difficult to handle in high winds and difficult seas. Right, moving on, please. We have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Basically, we have got a situation where the ownership model of the ferries is totally different to the ownership model of trains, so they can't be compared. However, what I would like are the panel's views on the new Chief Executive Officer of Wightlink being the current Customer Relations Director of Southern Water. So what is Wightlink going to be doing with our water in the future?
Right, I'll just repeat that question for our candidates. The question is, what are we going to be doing with the new Southern Water ex-employee who's turned up as the CEO of Wightlink? And I think we'd like some views on that. Joe, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind, on this occasion.
With me? Yeah, I don't particularly want to comment on an individual, but I do agree with you. It's certainly a PR problem for the ferry company, for Wightlink. A rather unusual one, but they knew that when they hired. I don't particularly want to comment on an individual. You know, I think the company is the problem, and that's where our energy should be channelled, and the companies that own the ferry companies. I think just on the rail comparison, just to clarify the point, I'm not saying we operate the same model cross Solent as we do for rail. I merely make the point that the rail services are regulated by government in terms of they have to deliver a minimum timetabling. That's why you get empty trains running through the night. If it was up to the companies to decide, I'm sure they'd cut some of those services, but they can't. So that's what I want to replicate with the ferries. And of course, government sign off on train prices. Slight irony, I think. I used to travel a lot when I was a student and working in London, and the train services, certainly 20 years ago, were always much worse than the ferry services. You could get on your ferry and you knew it was going to turn up, you knew it was going to go, but the trains were often late or didn't connect. Now they're not connecting more often because of the ferries. So the ferries have got worse while the trains have arguably got better in the last 20 years. That's certainly off-the-cuff point.
Interesting viewpoint, thank you. I understand.
And of course, in terms of the trains, they are contracted for a certain period of time, and the government could renationalise them. the government could renationalise trains, as and when the contracts run out. That is not the situation with the ferries.
Yep. Okay, thank you. I'm going to move over to David, if I may. Thank you.
Well, making a joke of it, I suppose if somebody goes to the toilet on the ferries while she's chief executive, go straight in the sea, won't it? No, it's bizarre. It's bizarre how these big companies choose chief executives. I've got no experience of cross-Solent or anything they do. That's just the country we live in at the moment. And I don't think it's right. What the hell does she know about running a ferry service? Practically nothing. So she's going to rely on her staff who've been there for a long time, and they will advise her on how the ferry should be run. But she's obviously going to be paid an extraordinary amount of money for actually knowing nothing about the ferries, and I find that bizarre.
Thank you. Moving on to Sarah, please.
Yeah, I'm just going to say similar sort of thing. Perhaps they've picked her because she's managed to get around the regulations of dumping all that stuff in the sea, and now they think they can get around the regulations that are coming, but they're going to be forced on them by... so they've got the expert then in the house, haven't they? So that's why I'm not very trusting, am I?
Thank you. Vix, could you pick that up, please? Thank you.
Yeah, they're trolling us, aren't they? It's a laugh, announcing the new CEO from there. Water and ferries are linked, and in fact on Sunday we had a visit from our Green Baroness Jenny Jones, came down from London, and in the morning she met with some of the Wightlink Users Committee, and in the afternoon we looked at stopping the sewage and nationalising water, because there's a huge link between the two, and now they're trolling us with the actual leader of it. What does surprise me is that neither Labour nor the Conservatives are planning to nationalise the water companies, so I don't actually trust them to be able to look at all of those options for our ferries.
Thank you. I wonder if, Emily, if you could say something about that.
Yes, thank you. I'm not going to comment on an individual that I don't know, and hope to work with the CEO of Wightlink and other services like the Hover Travel to improve cross-Solent travel. As your MP, if elected, then I will want to have constructive relationships with the companies and public service and a whole range of stakeholders, and indeed engaging with Wightlink User Group to establish your views as things might change. So it is important. In my lighter moments, I've thought recently about, oh well, does this mean that the next excuse is going to be the ferries are being cancelled or delayed because it's too difficult to wade through the sewage? Let's hope not, because of course we'll be giving attention to Southern Water and regulating better there too. So I will work with the new Chief Executive of Wightlink and other services for the benefit of islanders and visitors, and that is the sensible grown-up thing to do, and that's what Labour is about.
Thank you very much. And Michael, briefly, if you could. Thank you.
I think it's irony, isn't it? I remember the original Conservatives that nationalised all these things, Sea-Link, water companies. It was the worst thing they do, the same as selling off all the council housing, and now we have a housing problem. So we do need, what I think very important is connectivity. We need to actually have our trains linking to our ferries, linking to the hovercraft, linking to the buses. If you are a person that has to go onto the mainland for health reasons, it is a nightmare on connectivity, and it's painful if you have just come with cancer treatment and that. I've been taking my wife backwards and forwards recently an operation. It was a nightmare, and it cost a fortune. One of the things that Hover Travel have done is working on, and I've been working with them, of how we can get all the travel operations have one ticket. So you don't have to actually get all these separate tickets, which actually you have to do, which is a nightmare. So for me, it is actually, as Emily said, You've got to work with people. It's not for me to actually judge people where they come from. I have to work with them. I might not like the structures they come into, but we have to. And I did that as mayor when I worked with Hover Travel and Wightlink and the mayor of Portsmouth to get, during COVID, the fast cap back, because it wasn't going to come back until the October, and I got it back in the August, right, for some of the summer season. If I remember this, in 2020, and that was by working with people. And if you remember, we did Ticket to Ride. We actually worked and actually increased the number of people to come, so why they brought the service back.
Thank you.
So I got a track record of actually working with these people. Thank you.
Thank you. Good. We have time for at least one more question from the floor, please. The lady in the pink in the middle there somewhere. Thank you. Your mic is coming.
Hello, this is Angela Harris. I was on the internet a couple of months ago and I found a piece of information which was obviously put up in 2018 by Chris Ashman. Chris Ashman was sent over to the island to do look into regeneration. He did a survey which I have never seen, and I would like to know why. This survey, the Cloud Bubble.
Can you try and move the mic a bit closer?
Sorry. It ended up as Cloud Bubble of what people wanted from regeneration, and the biggest writing, because most people wanted it, by far was a fixed link. This has been hidden by consecutive governments. This was councillors. This was written or made up in 2018. We're now 2024, and this is the first time I've seen it.
Yeah, so your question is...
Why has it got swept under the carpet? Because the least they should be doing is a survey.
Yeah, I think the difficulty we have is the candidates here are unlikely to be able to explain why it's been swept under the carpet by the councillors. So,
yes, I understand that.
Yeah.
So why are we not having a referendum? Because that, to me, states that we should be having a referendum. And which candidate is going to support a referendum?
well, I think you had three candidates who actually had a little laugh about that earlier and thought that was not something that was going to happen. So I'm really sorry, I'm not going to put that question to them. I'm going to move on. Right, another question, please, from someone out back there. Thank you. Lovely. Thanks very much.
Hi, yes, question from Oliver Tucker. There are 6,000 people in the Wightlink users group today. It's only getting bigger all the time. You can see from the people that are out here tonight how much we care about this issue. I would like to know which candidates happen to actually be members of the Wightlink users group, how long they have been members of the user group. I'd like to know how many of your friends and your family you've invited to be part of the Wightlink users group, because this really matters. Thank you.
Right, so two-part question. Are each of you candidates members of the Wightlink user group? If so, how long have you been a member, and have you encouraged your family members to become members of work as well? I'm going to start, I think, probably with Emily on my right.
Okay, thank you. No, I'm not a member, but I would say I'm a supporter, and if elected, I will certainly encourage others to be involved, and I will want to, as I've said already tonight, engage with the users group. I am a regular traveller with Wightlink and other cross-Solent services. My background, much of my background is in equality issues and campaigning on a range of issues, and particularly steeped in the disability movement, where we have a phrase, nothing about us without us, and I think that transfers into other movements, and I think that is important to bear in mind in terms of users of Wightlink services and indeed other cross-Solent services. So the principle of user engagement is very close to my heart, and you have my support in the efforts and the endeavours that you are taking forward in terms of representations to the companies, to us as politicians, and to other stakeholders. And please continue that fight. It's an important one, and I welcome it, and I thank you for your work that you're doing on behalf
short answer is no, I'm not. And the quick answer is yes, I will be. And I will ask people I know to be part of the users group. Yeah, I deal with Wightlink nearly every day booking ferries. So yes, I should be. And you know, your concerns tonight are my concerns because I'm a resident and a businessman on the island. So I should be joining up.
Lovely, thank you. Michael, please.
I definitely signed something some time ago, but actually I think it's in, and I know my wife and other friends and things are, but actually there is a sort of issue here because I'm a local councillor, and if I do belong totally to a group, I have to actually think of my effect to you, and because if you actually do belong to certain groups and you come to a vote, then there's a conflict of interest, and I think it's important to actually look. So I support the group, but I want to be of use to you as an elected Isle of Wight councillor, and that will be the same as an MP. And I think it's the same with belonging to a number of groups. You've just got to be look at it that I'm elected to serve you, right? And it's important that I don't put myself in a position of conflict of interest. But definitely, to me, it is a priority issue, and it's something that I have supported for a very long time. But you might actually find I might have filled in a form a long time ago and have actually forgotten about it. But that's my answer to that. You've got my 100% support, and a fabulous organisation. I mean, as a politician, this is gold dust.
Michael, thank you. I'll have a couple of minutes to sum up in just a second. To Sarah, please, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Yes, I am a member. I then rejoined again when I'd done my political page. I would repost it so other people join. Everyone I'm friends with on Facebook would have had a link to join because you can share it. And I think I've been a member for quite a long time because one of the first things when you did a demonstration down at the bottom of Ryde Pierhead, and I was working, I come down with all my work gear on covered in paint and took your photographs when you had all your high-vis and everything on. So I can't remember, it was a couple of years ago, but I have... Was it last August? I'm useless with time frame, but I remember coming down and I was, filthy dirty. But, so a long time. But please do, everybody, go back and share it on your Facebook group and make sure, get as many members as possible, because everything they're doing is for us. So.
Thank you, Sarah. On to Joe, please.
I'm not a member, no, and I probably echo some of the things that Michael has said. I think, like Michael, I'm a councillor, and I think a councillor or an MP are in a privileged position to be able to champion all residents and all important causes, and to do it not as a member of a particular group is much more powerful, and avoids any suggestion that they are championing a particular group they're a member of. And Wightlink Users Group has done some fantastic things. I mean, the fact we're here today, that you've taken this opportunity to get candidates in front of you, and the candidates have turned up, it shows how strong the group is. But we would all acknowledge no one group has a monopoly of any particular issue, and there are lots of people out there who want to see better ferries. And of course, I would encourage them to join Wightlink Users Group. But if they don't, that's no criticism of them, and we want to continue to engage in them and get their engagement so that we fight the cause together. So I wanted to make a point also on working cross-party, but I think I'll leave that to my summing up.
Thank you. Lovely. Vix, please.
Yes, I'm a member of the Facebook group. I think you can also join it through the website as well. I think there's more people on the website. I'm not sure how long for, but I've invited loads of people to it. Actually, it's a really important group, certainly the Facebook group, if you're on Facebook, because you learn an awful lot. You get to read people's testimonies, you get to find things out and share information. And I think everybody should be able to do that, councillors or not councillors. I do try and get involved in a lot of campaigning groups that I can. So I've been involved in Frack Free Isle of Wight and in saving schools over in the west, and Islanders for Europe and NHS Public and carnivals and associations. It's just the stuff that I like doing, to meet people and find things out about it. I try to work as hard as I would want to be working hard to be your MP, yeah.
Thank you very much, Vix. We now move to an opportunity for each of the candidates to sum up, and I'm going to ask Mark to get a hand on that bell again. They're going to get 2 minutes each, and if the bell rings, I'd ask you to conclude your remarks, please. So the way we're going to run this is we're going to start from my right, and we're going to run just straight across the table. So we'll start with Joe, move to Emily, and then off to the candidates over to my left. So we have 2 minutes starting now. Joe, thank you.
Thank you. Well, that was fantastic, and to have the opportunity for a lot of audience participation as well, especially as candidates said so much at the beginning. So I think I've made it fairly clear my priorities are realistic. It's about government stepping in and regulating, and I will refer to the trains again because it already happens. We have a model where private companies run services and the government have oversight. I think that's achievable. The Conservatives have put an all-options review in their manifesto, and that is an opportunity for us all to get together and make the argument for regulation. We need to work cross-party, whoever is elected, and whichever government gets the keys, or whichever party gets the keys to number 10. And we want to avoid any disagreements along party political lines, because that plays into the hands of the ferry companies. There is nothing better for the ferry companies than if we disunite against them and argue amongst ourselves and use this as a political football. And I think tonight has been remarkably unparty political, especially given it's during a general election campaign. And I think that's a good thing. I think that is a major strength. I really do think that is a major strength. Some of the other ideas that have been suggested, I don't want to do down any ideas, but I would urge realism. And in terms of other ferry companies coming in, there is one viable option on the table that is at least halfway down the track of delivering it, and the fact that the council leader has already made an announcement about that shows that it's gaining traction from the council. But other than that, I think we need to keep our feet on the ground. And I would finish by saying the Isle of Wight Council needs to do and say more. It's very quiet, and it represents the whole Isle of Wight. And I would be fairly sure that 39 councillors would agree we should do something, but the Isle of Wight Council doesn't seem to have a view, and I think that is a gap that needs sorting.
Thank you, Joe. Moving on to Emily, please.
Thank you. I agree that it's important that if I'm elected as your Member of Parliament, that I work across the political spectrum. Tonight is a good example of a good deal of agreement that we can take forward. And I look forward, as your MP, if I have that privilege, to cooperate with Councillors Robertson and Lilly, for example, in the Isle of Wight Council being a party to improving regulation and our wider missions of the Labour government that we are offering around economic security and growth. The importance of that, of course, is that we need to break down the barriers of the cross-Solent market to make it work more effectively for passengers. And that is reliability, affordability, and regulation is key to that. Our other missions are about bringing about clean energy superpower, and cross-Solent travel can be part of that, as we've already heard. Doing things differently by building an NHS fit for the future, making our streets safer, and breaking down barriers to opportunity. And of course, opportunity comes when people are able to move around our island and across the Solent each way in terms of our economic viability, in terms of health service opportunities for young people branching out into their futures. So we will be a mission-driven government if we are elected. And it's important to say that I believe it is time for change, and it's time for our island to get its future back. It's time to change, to turn the page on 14 years of chaos and failure so that Labour can come in to offer you responsible government and to deliver, and that includes delivering cross-Solent services which are efficient and effective for your needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vix, please.
Every single one of us this evening have told you that solving the ferry problem is going to be our top priority for us if you elect us as the MP for Isle of Wight East. And contrary to popular belief, not all of us are lying. It's up to you who've listened to us to make that decision about who you think has a plan to achieve it and is going to be able to do that solution. If you're not sure, there are still another 5 more Hustings events to go to in the next week or so. The ferries are our lifeline, but they're also the biggest obstacle and the biggest challenge to us in terms of frequency, connectivity and cost. Our health service, our schools, our tourism trades, local businesses all have to rely on our ferries. And it's very difficult to find a parallel to this. You know, most of the rest of the world do not run their ferries in the way that we do. I applaud the members of the Wightlink Users Group for bringing us together. They've got the energy, they've got the expertise and they've got the determination to bring us ferries. But they know that they need the council and they need the MP and they need us islanders. I've been to the action days and the meetings and the presentations. I've tried to help where I can. And now I can be here with this opportunity to say I can do that on a national stage. It is Green Party policy to take infrastructure projects like rail and buses and ferries into public ownership. But as one of a group of Green MPs, I'll be able to push the Labour government to be further on regulation, on public service obligation, even on subsidies. There's a whole host of options to go forward. I hope that we can make this 2024 election the moment we choose a new MP who can, we trust, to work hard, and I hope that that person will be me. Thank you.
Thank you, Vix. Moving on then to Michael, please.
No one should be penalised for living on the island. No child should actually not have a future because they live on an island. I have 8 years, and before that 40 years working within health, and have a track record and experience, and I think it's important when you decide who you want your MP, it's important that you actually choose someone who's actually got a track record. As Mayor of Ryde, I worked with a range of different people and started to bring investment into this town and came through COVID for Ryde to actually develop, and I would like to see that cascade across. You need an MP who can go and talk to people, get investment, persuade ministers, etc. to do that. And actually the Lib Dems, as one of the smaller parties, is able to do that. It does have the 80 members of the House of Lords. It has a core base to get a private bill, and we need an Island Act, and I've been the only politician that's consistently argued this for 8 years, and I believe that I've got the experience and the gravitas to deliver it. I think my track record of delivery speaks for itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Moving on then, I think, to Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'd just like to say that I'm not going to be putting all my eggs in one basket. I think the regulation, fine, you can push ahead with that. I do definitely think that we need to maybe look at splitting the landing areas from the ferry companies is another option. Looking at all of these other things, there's no reason why you can't look at all of them in parallel, because it just gives us more options. I love my island. I want my kids to be able to live here and stay here, but the ferry does cause problems. It causes problems for how often you can get off and come back and see people, and you end up waiting just for the vouchers to come through so you can do it for 50 quid. But I'm not a politician. I haven't got into this because I've studied politics or any of that stuff, but I want the best for our island. I want the best for our kids. I will try my hardest. I will work with anybody. I'll take any other suggestions. I'm not proud. I'm not scared to ask for help. I'll go to experts. I'll go and ask other people. I just want things to work for us better. The whole country seems to be going down the pan. Nothing seems to work. Our NHS, you look at the trains. They bought trains, but they didn't check they fit the platforms. Nothing seemed. No one asked the experts anymore. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. These people have done these reports. They've spoken. All of us use it, but they know exactly what needs to be done, what regulations need to go in. All I would be doing is taking them to the right people, knocking on the right doors, phoning the right people, bugging them until they did what they were meant to be doing. So that's what I can offer you. I won't give up, I promise. Thank you, Sarah. Moving on to David, please.
Those people who know me, that anything I do 100%. And if I was an elected MP, I would act on your behalf 100%. I would listen to all your concerns and I would take them to the relevant people to get the actions that you want done. So I think that's where I am. I've learnt a little bit tonight, I must admit, and I will certainly take that forward in my campaign. As I said before, I'm not just about island roads and moving those. There's all sorts of things on my agenda that I'd like to change in this country. The country, unfortunately, I think is broken. There's so much wrong. The NHS, dentistry, housing, lack of, rented accommodation, lack of, young people chasing accommodation, ending up paying an extraordinary amount of rent to some landlords who don't deserve it. So all of these things I will be taking on the behalf of the island people. I'm passionate about the island, passionate about where I live. I think we're a good community. Certainly in Ventnor we've got a fantastic community, and everybody I know comes up to me and says, well done, we're glad you're helping us on the roads. We're not getting anywhere, but at least somebody's trying. And I've always been known as a trier. That's what I am, and that's what I promise to be.
Thank you very much, David. Well, I'm sure we're grateful to all the candidates for having given us the benefit of their experience, their opinions and their views on the various questions that have been put to them tonight. So I'd particularly like to thank them for being here and for giving up their time and making sure we know a lot more about them. Round of applause, please.